So then, I do need to recognize, yet again, title card isn't finished. I've been going through it this week. If it wasn't enough that we were playing catch up with paperwork and everything, in 10 with that, we were also managing a whole lot of annoying changes, and specifically so I can avoid making screw-ups, I had to focus even harder on my job, which meant stressing me out, which meant I couldn't get much drawing done. To top it all off, my phone. Those who might be aware, and that those who tuned in yesterday probably heard about that, I'm running into issues with my phone. For whatever reason, it's not accepting the appropriate SIM card. It's supposed to be 4G, and it's not accepting a 4G SIM card. So I've been trying to troubleshoot in the background with my sister how the fuck I can make it work. And it turns out the only way I can make it work is by not making it work, by potentially getting a new phone. I just got one a month and a half ago, and now I suddenly need to replace it because fuck all. It's so annoying. But that, my complaining and bitching aside, Nakamura, my name is Sage Blake. I'm a wanderer, storyteller, artist and mature, and we're back with more 9 hours, 9 doors, 9 persons. When we last left off, I appropriately stopped right at a bit of a cliffhanger. It's probably obvious what this cliffhanger entails, but hey. As he looked more closely, his surprise and excitement gave way to weariness. One by one, the others saw what he'd seen. They moved as one, for the door. The 6 of them stood in front of the door, arranged in a semicircle. Santa stepped forward. He took hold, spoke without looking at the other 5. Ready? They nodded a silent assent. With a deep breath, Santa threw open the door. Yes, Daniel. You remember 999, correct? Hope you're doing well. They poured through the doorway and into the room. Even without looking around, each one of them knew where they were. The same room they'd been in not so long ago. The central hospital room with empty beds from wall to wall. Yeah, I understand that. It's been a rough week on my end as well. Ugh. Just playing catch up with a lot of paperwork is never fun. I see. I believe I understand what you're saying. The 6 of you split into 2 teams and went through doors 7 and 8. You solved puzzles in the operating room and the laboratory, then met one another in the hallway after opening your respective locked doors. It looked like anyone might, after only just waking up, but it seemed his brain was working as well as ever. He'd managed to grasp, summarize, and understand each team's report. At any rate, I feel a bit silly for my show of altruism. I'm sure you'll be back for me. I did hope you'd come back, but I confess, I didn't think you'd be back so soon. Ace shook his head with a rueful smile. Well, we saw each other again. We ain't dead, so I say that's good enough. Anyway, let's say we get out of this creepy old place. We found the key we needed. The key? Ain't that just what I said? I'm talking about the Jupiter key. We found it in the operating room. Right, Jinpei? Yeah. The solar system keys. We found a couple more in the laboratory in the kitchen. Here. Earth and Saturn. With that, she pressed them into Junpei's hand. The metal key had the Earth symbol. The key card, Saturn. I might lose them. It's probably better if you hold on to them. That way, it won't be my fault if they get lost. Junpei felt slightly less than honored. As a group, they had 3 keys that hadn't been used. Jupiter, Earth, Saturn. Junpei stowed those keys. June spoke up.
The Jupiter key is supposed to be for the door at the end of that long, straight hallway, right?
Yeah, if the map's right, that connects to the central staircase. Then next to the stairs...
Wait.
The first words out of Clover's mouth in quite some time shocked everyone. Her face suggested they weren't going to be happy words that she was about to say.
What about door 3?
Look, you saw the map, right? It's the same as 7 and 8. It'll just lead us back to the big hospital room. There's no point to seeing what's on the other side of the door.
There is a point. At least there is for me.
There were tears in her eyes, but she glared at 7 as hard as she could, just the same. She looked very much like a frightened puppy. There wasn't a man alive who could have resisted them. 7 looked everywhere in the room except at Clover, muttered, coughed apologies under his breath. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. The snake might be on the other side of door 3. Very well. I'll be coming with you then. I've had a nice long rest. I think it's time I was up and about again. So, 7, you'll help me, won't you? Me? 417 leads to a digital route out of 3. Damn. Well, I guess that's how it's gotta be. So I'm going with you, huh? Yes, you are. Alright, let's get moving. And so it was decided. Clover, Ace, and 7 would research door 3. Alright, we're heading out.
Careful.
Didn't think I'd be hearing that from you, Lotus.
Don't let go to your head. I'd be in trouble if the 3 of you bought it. The rest of us can't open the 9 door.
Truth comes out.
7 nodded, as if this answer made more sense. Then pulled the rat.
Let's go.
It was only a matter of moments for the 3 of them to jump in. A few moments more before the door shut. Alright. We should get moving too. Get moving?
Where are we going?
Everyone except Lotus seemed confused. Well, it would be a waste of time to just sit around, wouldn't it? Let me explain. Oh, I get it. We are gonna see if we can get anywhere interesting with the Jupiter key. Yep. If we're lucky, we might find Snake. They were at the end of the hallway and lined by individual hospital rooms. The Jupiter symbol was engraved on the keyhole. Junpei trawled out that key, slid it in.
Hello, Tanos! Welcome!
He twisted. With a nice sharp click, the door unlocked. Junpei's companions nodded. He nodded back, and quietly opened the door. Inside was exactly what he expected to see from the map of the ship's interior. A tremendous hall, almost like a ballroom, with a massive central staircase. Ah, great, back to the beginning. You sure this is a good idea?
What do you mean?
Well, we already searched every inch of this room, didn't we? I'm asking you if there's any reason we came back here.
Of course there's a reason.
Man, sometimes I can't tell if you're smart or just lucky. Huh? This. Santa cocked his head to one side, like an inquisitive bird, looked at them. After several long moments, during which it became apparent Santa had no idea what the cards meant, June took pity on him. Don't you remember, Santa? On C deck, where we are now, there's a big elevator beyond the stairs, right? Next to that, there's a card reader with the Saturn symbol. And on A deck, on the door to the left, there is a keyhole with the Earth symbol, I think. So, the two keys that Jumpy has should let us use the elevator and the door on A deck. Huh. Yes, you are an inquisitive bird, T. All the head pats. Exactly. June and Santa smiled. Alright, I got it. Let's get started then. What do you say we split into two teams? Lotus and I'll search the Earth one, so you two can search Saturn. Sounds good. They decided that their initial search should be brief, 10 minutes. They'd meet back near the central staircase once they were finished. Junpei and Jun headed for the elevators. Sure enough, there was a card reader bolted to the wall next to the left elevator. One swipe of the Saturn key card, and the light blinked to life. Seems it's working now. Alright! Now, how do I call the elevator? There's only a single button to the right of the elevator door. On it, an upside-down triangle. There didn't appear to be an up button. Junpei pushed it. He didn't have much of a choice. It opened. Look, Jumpy! Jin's voice was excited, but Junpei could hear some anxiety. Ah, sweet, it opened. Let's get going. He stepped into the open door without hesitation. But as he was about to set foot, he felt a hand on his arm. Wait. What? I'm not really I just... Oh, gosh. Junpei was at a loss. What could you be so frightened of? No, I could be the perv here. Sure. After a little thought, Junpei decided she had to be nervous about being locked up in such a small space alone with the boy. In a way, it was kind of cute. Very, demure, you could say. Still, even though it wasn't exactly roomy in the elevator, they weren't going to be pressed up against one another. At least, they didn't have to be. Still, it was making her nervous. Junpei couldn't help but think how innocent she was. Come on, let's go. Yet again, he felt himself restrained before he entered the elevator. I said wait! Why? Aren't you afraid, Jumpy? Afraid of what? Well, I've never... you know... What, never been in an elevator with a guy before? Even so, she seemed awfully alarmed. I might get wet. Down there. Well, of course you would. That's the way it works. I mean, I've never heard of anyone getting soaking wet somewhere else. That's true. You don't mind? Mind what? You know. I don't think I'd probably, like it. Jeez, Jumpy, you're brave. Really? I mean, I kind of think any guy would do the same thing, you know? What happens, happens, right? If you get the chance, you just gotta go for it. That's what a man's supposed to do, I guess. You're so cool. That doesn't really seem like the sort of thing you ought to admire someone for. I'm kind of scared. Well, like you said, you've never done it before. Yeah. So, I don't think I'll be able to last very long, and then it'll be... over. Over? Yeah. I'd go to heaven. Kinda feels like you're floating in space, your mind gets all fuzzy, like when you pass out. At least, that's what I've heard from people who've experienced it. Yeah, I've heard that too. Though I don't think the same thing happens to guys. What? But it happened to men too, wouldn't it? It happened to anyone. Once it gets into your body, the same thing happens to everyone. I mean, usually it doesn't go inside the man. I mean, generally... Yeah, it does. Well, eventually it will. It's not like you really have a choice. Your body will force you to swallow some of it eventually.
you trying to do to me?
Nothing. I'm not gonna force you to do anything. I'm just saying that's what happens. It's a psychological reaction to what you're experiencing.
Was that really how it happened? It occurred to Junpei that perhaps that was how it worked. Perhaps he's been mistaken all these years, that he misunderstood life so gravely? The thought terrified him. June seemed to be entirely oblivious to Junpei's mounting confusion and terror.
I know most men probably have larger lungs, but even then, I don't think you could hold your breath for 20 or even 10 minutes. Eventually, you'd have to breathe, then the water would get in. And once that happens, your body won't be able to get oxygen anymore, and you'll start to feel that floaty feeling as you pass out.
I wonder how many people were thinking something dirty there. An apt moment to bring up, I remastered one of the emotes. Because let's face it, I'm more like an overt pervert. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't last very long.
See?
She was afraid that the only elevator button pointed down. And that meant the elevator couldn't go any higher than the floor they were on. As he thought about it, Junpei realized he hadn't seen elevators on the A or B decks either. All of that meant the elevator could only take them to the lower deck. And the floor below the one they were on, D deck, should be submerged. Wait a minute. The elevator came up from somewhere under us, right?
Well, yeah, I guess it did.
It didn't open right away after you pressed the button.
It didn't open right away after you pressed the button. There was a motor noise like it was moving, then it opened.
Exactly. Take a look inside. It's not wet at all, is it? The walls, even the floor is completely dry.
You're right, they are.
She looked around the elevator, embarrassed. Well, we could test it.
Test it.
Watch this. Junpei put one foot in the elevator, bent around the corner until he could see the floor buttons. There were only two, E and C. He pushed the E button, jumped out. The door slid shut, and they heard the grinding of the motor as the elevator car moved down. A few moments later, they heard the sound of the elevator grinding open several floors below. With another tap of the button, they brought the elevator back. The door slid open, and there wasn't any water to be found. See? Junpei couldn't resist puffing out his chest a little bit. June still looked confused.
What does that mean? How can the E deck be safe if D is full of water?
Here's what I think. The elevator shaft in E deck must be watertight and separated from wherever the ship's been punctured. Here, let me show you.
Oh, I see. So that's why the ship hadn't sunk. The shape of the inside keeps it all from filling with water.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on. Junpei continued talking as he closed the notebook, slipped it back into his pocket. I'm gonna go down and check it out. You stay here.
But...
Come on, just do it, alright? He gave Jun's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, hopped on. He pushed the E button, and the door closed. June looked worried, her eyes darting back and forth as if she were trying to make a decision, then...
I'm coming with you.
At the last moment, June dashed forward, right just before the doors closed. The impact caused Junpei to accidentally tab the open button. but it was too late. The door had shut, and the two of them were headed back down to the E-deck. He was surprised by June that he didn't have time to think. The elevator stopped. The door slid open. Nothing seemed unusual. No fish going about their fishy business, or jellyfish floating lazily through the water. There was, however, a blowfish. Or at least something looked very much like one. June's cheeks were puffed out, her mouth a tiny, intense frown. Oh, knock it off. It's just like I thought. This part hasn't flooded. Come on, look around. There's no water here. June looked around and exhaled.
You're right. It's not flooded at all.
See?
But there is a whole lot of water.
Yeah, right on top of us.
What's gonna happen if the ceiling breaks?
Well, we'd probably get really wet. Up there.
Huh?
At any rate, we should probably go back as soon as we can, once we're done looking around down here. Lotus and Santa might already be back.
Okay, good idea.
The first thing he noticed was a set of thick iron bars. They ran the length of the room, separating the left elevator from the right. Well, we can't go over that way. Then perhaps... In the corner of the room that has the elevators, there was an opening. Junpei walked in, stuck his head around the corner. A long, straight hallway stretched in front of him.
That door at the end of the hallway, is that a 6?
Sure enough, it was. The red. I knew it. A numbered door! Of course, with only 2 people, there wasn't anything they could do to get in. Then let's head back.
Yeah.
Junpei and June turned, headed back to C-Deck. On their way back, Junpei noticed a map on the wall. As it turned out, it was a burnt map of the ship's interior for E-Deck. So you guys found door 1? They met back up with Santa and Lotus. Apparently, there's another numbered door on A-Deck, just like the one on E-Deck, beyond the door with the Earth key. All told, they'd discovered 2 new doors, 6 and 1.
It is interesting the E-Deck wasn't flooded.
Lotus was quiet for a moment, lost in thought.
Well, we don't really know if all of E-Deck is safe.
We only checked the area around the elevator.
Even so, it's interesting.
You said the 6th door was there, right?
Yes.
And that means Zero planned all this out, even the sinking. It would have been some pretty serious remodeling of the ship's interior.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Yeah. I wonder how long it took. I can't even imagine how much it must have cost.
It would have been a ton, that's for sure. Well, that doesn't go along with what Ace was saying. The most reasonable explanation would be that this was done by some organization with access to a whole lot of money.
Yeah, it does make sense.
That thought made them all go quiet. June bit her lip when Lotus sighed softly to herself. Santa cracked a stiff neck, stared off into the distance, at nothing.
I don't think it's a good idea to stay here.
June looked up at Junpei. You're right. Ace and his team might be back.
Well, June, Junpei, and I should be able to open door 1.
Huh? You guys leaving me behind?
Just kidding. Let's go.
Lotus's words were all the impetus they needed. Back to the large hospital room they went. The moment they stepped in, a voice echoed across the room. Hey! Where the hell did you guys go? Seven, Ace, and Clover had been back, but it seemed that Clover was hanging her back, almost as if there was something strange about them. Seven had the look of a man who'd seen a ghost. Ace was just as pale. Clover looked as though she was only moments from passing out. For a moment, they stood there, looking at one another. Junpei looked nervously around, waiting for someone to speak. Nothing. He looked at Seven. What happened?
What the hell kind of a question is that?
Seven was trying hard to be angry, but something had shaken him. His shoulders were trembling, his voice strained.
Snake is...
Seven couldn't finish. He looked away, his face twisted by... Junpei wasn't sure what. Instead, Ace spoke. After a breath, after closing his eyes. Snake is dead. He died, just as the ninth man did. The air felt as if it had been sucked out of the room. Junpei's heartbeat quickened. He realized he had trouble breathing. Cold sweat beaded down his forehead and neck. June, Santa, and Lotus looked the same. All were frozen in place, faces white.
Oh my god. That's not true, is it?
We should make sure. We should, yeah. They nodded to one another, entered door 3.
Wait! Not that way!
They stopped short. Seven was pointing at the door with no number.
I stuck a screwdriver in there to keep the door from closing. It's not locked, so you could go in that way.
Where is he?
Shower room, left side of the hallway. I put a broom in there, too, to keep the door open.
We can get in without going through the numbered door, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Their new destination clear, Junpei and his companions headed for the door with no number. In the hallway, it was easy to spot the metal door on the left wall. It hadn't been open where they'd been through before, but now, just as Seven had said, there was a broom between the door and the frame, keeping it open. Blood warning, by the way. They looked at it for a moment, stepped inside.
Ugh, it smells horrible.
Lotus wrinkled her nose, covered her mouth in disgust. Even Santa pinched his shut.
Ugh, yeah, this is pretty awful. I feel like I've got puke.
It's just as bad as they'd said. Perhaps worse. A hideous smell filled the air, so thick they could almost taste it. Sour, smelled of fish, feces, and burnt meat. It worked its way through Junpei's nose, down his throat, to pound against the entrance to his stomach. He put his hands over his mouth, struggled to keep what little was in his stomach where it belonged. They didn't have to wonder where the body was. There was blood everywhere, a few arms of the splatter reaching toward them as they walked in through the door. All one had to do was follow the many radial arms to their source. The body itself was hidden by a divider. June, you should stay here.
But...
Please, just do me a favor, okay? He didn't give her a chance to say no. He put his hand on her shoulder, as if to shove her into the ground like a tent pole, turned, walked toward the edge of the divider. It felt like it took an eternity for him to get there. Santa and Lotus followed, timid, nervous, like a pair of children. They reached the divider. They looked at one another and nodded. Junpei put his hands on the divider, peered around the corner. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. He felt his heart collapse like an empty cigarette carton, and time froze. In an instant it would take for the image. He knew in that instant he'd take the image before him to the grave. What was left of the body sat in a sea of blood. Chunks of flesh torn from the body sat in the blood like tiny islands in a great Red Sea. A vast ragged hole had been torn in the torso. What remained of his intestines spilled out like fresh spaghetti. Smaller chunks of meat had splattered against the wall, become stuck as they dried. Globules of yellowish fat had left trails like tiny slugs as gravity pulled them down the wall, even as they dried. Just like Ace said. Santa's voice was strained. Junpei suspected he was holding down some vomit of his own. Just like the Ninth Man. The detonator set off the bomb. It looked as though the explosion had been powerful. His legs were both bent in an odd, unnatural way. His left arm had split open, exposing the white bone of his ulna. His bracelet lay next to him. It seemed to have hit the wall hard enough to have shattered the display, which lay on the ground in pieces. Half of his head had simply collapsed. The blood coating almost made it look like raw pizza dough covered in tomato sauce. His clothes, too, were covered in blood. The burgundy tie, the white shirt, the jacket with the yellow piping, the gray slacks. All familiar to Junpei. No mistake about that. It's Snake. Lotus's voice was unnaturally deep and strained. Junpei heard it catch at her throat. The squeal of tortured metal made Junpei's teeth curl. It sounded like the noise of a ghost could make. No matter how many times he heard it, he knew he'd never get used to it. Every time, it put him on edge. In help, there was a girl nearby who looked far more like a ghost than a living human should. Clover. She sat on the edge of the bed, head drooping listlessly onto her chest. Eyes blank, stared across the room at nothing. Her breathing slow and mechanical. Aside from the rise and fall of her chest, she didn't move. Junpei felt as if a nudge might cause her to shatter. Snake was probably murdered. Chances are he was killed the same way the Ninth Man was. Seven lowered his voice, likely in an effort to keep Clover from hearing it. There were 4 other people in the room. Ace, Santa, June, Lotus. Junpei and Seven included. Seven looked at each of them in turn. It's pretty straightforward. Not that hard to figure out how they did it. First, the killers got Snake to authenticate on the red to open door 3. They then shoved him into it alone. Waited 9 seconds for the door to shut. Once that door shut, it was over for Snake, but he didn't give up. He probably knew it wouldn't do him any good, but he probably ran to the shower room looking for the dead. There was a small chance, but it wasn't likely he had anything to lose. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The detonator is only deactivated if everyone who authenticated when they went in uses the dead. 81 seconds after, that happened. I see. So that's what you mean by killers. You need at least 3 people to open one of the numbered doors, including Snake. It wouldn't open for Snake and a single killer. Exactly. That means we're looking at multiple perps here. Junpei crossed his arms and grunted. Just in case, I want to make sure. Let's say you're right. When do you think Snake was killed? When we all split up to look for the parts of the red, I think. Right after that was when we noticed he was gone. That means none of us have alibis. We were all off searching the rooms we'd been assigned, looking for those parts. Yeah, that means anybody could be a killer.
Wait a minute! What are you talking about? How can you say one of us is a killer so casually?
Well, not just one of us. If I'm right, there are at least 2 murderers. Why don't you calm down a bit, Seven? What are you going to gain by being so suspicious? And that's what Zero wants, you know. What, Zero wants? Exactly. This game was set up by Zero, wasn't it? Any game has a winner, a loser. Whoever makes it through door 9 is a winner. Those who don't are the losers. Zero's trying to make us fight against one another for that victory.
Then you're saying Zero's trying to split us up by making us fight each other?
Yes. That is why we can't let ourselves fall prey to suspicion. We have to trust one another, form a strong bond of friendship. Otherwise, we'll end up ensnared by Zero's manipulations.
And does that mean the person who killed Snake?
Almost certainly Zero himself. If there's anyone we should doubt, it's Zero. He masterminded this game, kidnapped all of us. Doesn't it seem reasonable he would have killed Snake as well? Jinbei hadn't considered that. If Zero had killed Snake, Zero was on the ship with them. But was Zero still on the ship? He wasn't sure. I'm just wondering about one thing. And what's that? How can you be so sure that Zero's on the ship? Really, Junpei, I confess, I'm a little disappointed. Usually you're rather sharp. Is it obvious? How so? This ship. Hmm? Zero said this ship several times when he addressed us. I am Zero, the captain of this ship. The purpose of the game is simple. Leave this ship alive. As you've no doubt surmised, this ship has begun to sink. If he weren't here, he wouldn't say this ship, would he? Actually, he would. Just saying. If this is supposed to be a psychological experiment of any type, then you want to make it as convincing as possible. It could be the fact that Zero's using, I don't know, recordings. Just a moment to think. I don't know what I pressed to get that on the screen. Okay, time to figure out what I pressed. Ah, crap.